Hey everyone, and welcome. Ever feel like you're walking on eggshells trying to get your point across?
Oh, I know that
Like
feeling.
you want to be persuasive, but not pushy.
Right. Nobody likes a bull in a china shop.
Exactly. So today we're diving into a book that's all about mastering the art of persuasion, but with a twist. It's called The Art of Persuasion, Winning Without Intimidation by Bob Burg.
Such a good one.
Have you read this one?
I have, yeah. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
Berg really nails this idea of getting what you want while making sure the other person feels good about it too.
Okay, I love that. Win-win, right. But how do we actually do that?
Well, Berg's whole approach hinges on understanding what makes people tick.
Okay, so like Psychology 101.
Exactly. He says that deep down, people make decisions based on emotion, even if they back it up with logic later.
Interesting. So it's not always about the facts.
Nope. Berg calls these justifications rational lies. We tell ourselves these stories to make sense of our choices, but really, it all comes down to seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, I know I should eat healthy, but that chocolate cake is calling my name.
Exactly. And we see this all the time, right? People buy things they don't need, stay in relationships that aren't working, all because they're driven by these underlying emotions.
So how do we tap into this? I mean, how do we use this knowledge to actually persuade someone without being manipulative?
Well, for starters, it's about framing your requests in a way that aligns with the other person's desires. So instead of just telling your team, work harder,
Which never works, by the way.
never. Instead, maybe you highlight the shared satisfaction of exceeding a goal. Like, imagine how good it will feel when we knock this project out of the park.
Ah, so you're appealing to their desire for achievement, for that feeling of accomplishment.
Exactly. Or let's say you're dealing with someone who's always procrastinating. Instead of getting frustrated, you could try emphasizing the potential problems procrastination might cause, appealing to their desire to avoid those negative consequences.
So it's about understanding what motivates them, what they're trying to move towards or away from.
You got it. And here's another crucial point Berg makes. Everyone has an ego.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. And acknowledging and respecting that ego, even in disagreements, is huge.
So it's not just about being right, it's about making the other person feel heard and respected, even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. Because bruised egos are at the heart of so many conflicts, right?
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in our own perspective and forget that other people have their own internal narratives, their own insecurities and hopes. We have to remember that.
We do. Berg argues that approaching situations with empathy, even when you're trying to persuade someone, is essential. Especially when things get a little, disagreeable.
Oh, I know those conversations. Things can escalate quickly if you're not careful. Which reminds me of another important point from the book. Responding versus reacting.
Yes, such a key distinction.
Right. Reacting is often impulsive, driven by those not so helpful negative emotions, like if someone cuts you off in traffic and you lay on the horn.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that sometimes.
Me too. But responding, that takes more self-awareness, more thought.
It does. It's about choosing your words carefully, even when you're feeling attacked or challenged. Like Berg gives this great example of dealing with a difficult customer service rep. Instead of mirroring their negativity, he suggests saying something like, "I'm sorry, did I do something to upset you?"
Oh, that's good. You're acknowledging that you might have played a part, even if unintentionally.
Exactly. It disarms the situation and can completely shift the dynamic.
It's like you're saying, hey, I'm here to understand, not to fight.
Exactly. And that kind of approach can work wonders in all sorts of situations.
I'd only imagine. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've got understanding motivations, respecting egos, responding thoughtfully. What else does Berg have up his sleeve?
Well, one of my favorite concepts from the book is what he calls tact.
Tact, like being polite.
Sort of, but it's more than that. Berg's father called tact the language of strength. It's about making your point without offending the other person. Even better, making them embrace your suggestion.
Okay, now we're talking. That sounds like a superpower.
Right. And it all starts with understanding how to speak to people in a way that resonates with them, in a way that makes them feel heard and respected.
So, how do we actually do that? What are some practical tips for speaking this language of strength?
Well, one technique that really stood out to me was matching words. It's as simple as it sounds. You repeat the other person's words back to them. People rarely argue with themselves, so it creates instant agreement and builds rapport.
It's like you're showing them that you're really listening and understand where they're coming from, which in turn makes them more receptive to what you have to say.
Exactly. And this can be especially helpful when you need to give feedback, especially if it's not all sunshine and roses. Instead of saying, "You messed this up," you could say something like, "I know how important accuracy is to you, so I wanted to point out a couple of things."
Ooh, that's so much better. It softens the blow and makes the other person feel like you're on their side.
It's about framing things in a way that feels collaborative instead of accusatory.
Hmm.
And, this idea of collaboration is key to Berg's entire approach. It's not about getting one over on the other person. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
I love that. So it's less about manipulation and more about,
Influence.
yes, influence with integrity.
Absolutely. It's about using your understanding of human nature to achieve your goals while also building genuine connections and making a positive impact.
Okay, I'm totally on board with that. So we've talked about understanding motivations, respecting egos, responding thoughtfully, and using tactful language. What other gems does Berg offer in this treasure chest of persuasion wisdom?
Well, one concept that really intrigued me was what he calls handing over power.
Wait, hold on. Handing over power, that sounds like the opposite of what we want to do when we're trying to persuade someone. Why would we give away our power, especially in a negotiation?
It's not about actually giving away your power, but rather creating the perception of it. Sometimes acknowledging the other person's authority can make them more receptive to your request.
Okay, I'm listening. How does that work?
It's like you're appealing to their sense of fairness, their desire to be helpful, even their ego. Think about it. If someone feels like you're coming at them with demands, they're more likely to put up walls.
Right. Nobody likes to feel pressured.
Exactly. But if you approach them with respect and acknowledge their position, they might be more willing to work with you.
Can you give me an example?
Absolutely. Berg tells this great story about dealing with a lost luggage situation at the airport. Instead of arguing with the airline employee, who was really just following protocol, he chose a different approach. He acknowledged her authority, explained his difficult situation, and then, and this is the key, he used a phrase that I think is pure gold. "If you can't do it, I'll definitely understand."
He gave her permission to say no.
Exactly. He took the pressure off and let her know that he respected her position.
Wow, that's so smart. I can see how that would completely change the dynamic. And it's not about being insincere. It's about recognizing that the other person has constraints and limitations that we might not be aware of.
Exactly. It's about approaching the situation with empathy and understanding, even when you're feeling frustrated or annoyed.
Which is easier said than done sometimes.
It is. But the more we practice these principles, the easier it becomes. And you know what? This handing over power idea, it applies to so many areas of life, from dealing with difficult people to even getting out of a speeding ticket.
Okay, now you've got me really intrigued. Tell me more about how this works in those situations. All right, you were about to tell me all about how this handing over power thing can help us get out of a speeding ticket.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Now, I'm not saying it's a guaranteed get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right, no promises.
Exactly. But Berg swears by this approach. It's about shifting your mindset from confrontational to collaborative, even with law enforcement.
Okay, interesting. So instead of getting defensive or arguing,
Right. Instead of all that, you start by acknowledging the officer's authority and, admitting that, yep, you were speeding.
so taking responsibility, showing them you're not trying to weasel out of it.
Exactly. And here's where the handing over power comes in. After you've acknowledged the situation, you can say something like, "I understand you have a job to do, and if you need to give me a ticket, I'll certainly understand. But if there's any chance you could let me off with a warning this time, I'd really appreciate it."
You're basically giving them permission to do their job while also appealing to their sense of fairness.
Exactly. You're not trying to make excuses. You're acknowledging their authority and hoping they might extend a little leniency. And you know what? Sometimes it actually works.
That's amazing. It sounds so counterintuitive, but I can see how it would be much more effective than arguing or trying to talk your way out of it.
It's about understanding human psychology. Everyone, even a police officer, appreciates respect and sincerity.
It's about treating people like human beings, even when they have authority over us.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with Berg's techniques, understanding motivations, respecting egos, responding thoughtfully, using tact. Anything else we haven't touched on yet?
Well, you mentioned something earlier about how to politely end a phone conversation with someone who loves to talk. I've definitely been in those situations where I'm tracked on the phone and I can't figure out how to escape.
Oh, I know that feeling. You're stuck there, phone practically glued to your ear. Well, Berg has a clever little technique he calls interrupting yourself.
Interrupting yourself. Doesn't that sound a little rude?
It might sound that way, but it's not. It's about creating a natural break in the conversation without actually interrupting the other person.
Okay, I'm listening.
So you wait for a natural pause in the conversation, and then you jump in with something like, "Oh my gosh, I just realized I have another call coming in that I absolutely can't miss. It was so great talking to you."
You're essentially creating a reason to end the conversation without making the other person feel like you're rushing them off the phone.
Exactly. It's subtle, polite, and surprisingly effective.
I love it. It's those little things that can make such a big difference in our interactions.
Absolutely. And speaking of little things, Berg also dedicates an entire chapter to the power of handwritten thank you notes.
You know, in this age of emails and texts, a handwritten note really does stand out.
Precisely. It shows you took the time and effort to express your gratitude in a personal and meaningful way.
It's those small acts of kindness that can really make someone's day.
Exactly. And it all ties into that principle of edification we talked about earlier, making people feel good about themselves.
It's about those little gestures that show you care, that you value the relationship.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of another powerful technique that Berg talks about, confessing ignorance.
Okay, now that sounds counterintuitive. Why would we want to admit we don't know something, especially when we're trying to be persuasive?
It might seem counterintuitive, but Berg argues that admitting we don't have all the answers can actually make us more persuasive. It shows humility and a willingness to learn, which can make us more likable and relatable.
Because it shows you're not afraid to ask questions, to be vulnerable?
Exactly. When you confess your ignorance, you're subtly complimenting the other person's expertise, making them feel valued.
You're shifting the dynamic from, I'm the expert here to tell you what to do, to, you have valuable knowledge that I can learn from.
You got it. It's about approaching the conversation with genuine curiosity and a desire to learn. People are usually more than happy to share their knowledge and experience when they feel respected and appreciated. And that shared connection can be the foundation of a much stronger relationship.
So much of this boils down to being genuine and respectful no matter who we're interacting with.
Absolutely. And one of the stories that really stuck with me from the book was about a guy named Ron Hale. He built a super successful business by consistently giving to others without expecting anything in return.
Okay, tell me more about this Ron Hale. What did he do exactly?
Well, Ron made it a habit to constantly visit schools, radio, and TV stations, even the local newspaper, offering his help and expertise. He wasn't trying to sell them anything. He genuinely wanted to add value to their work and their lives.
So he was embodying that go-giver mentality.
Exactly. And you know what? Because he was so generous with his time and knowledge, people naturally wanted to return the favor. He became known as the go-to guy, the one everyone wanted to work with and recommend to others.
It's that principle of reciprocity in action.
Precisely. When you give without expecting anything in return, it comes back to you tenfold.
And it all circles back to that core principle of making people feel good about themselves.
Exactly. When you go out of your way to help someone, to make their life a little bit easier or better, you're not just building goodwill, you're creating a genuine connection.
And those connections are invaluable.
Absolutely. They're the foundation of strong relationships, both personally and professionally.
This has been so eye-opening. Berg's approach to persuasion is so much more than just a set of techniques.
It's a philosophy, right?
It really is. It's a philosophy for building stronger, more authentic relationships, both with ourselves and with others.
I couldn't agree more. It's about approaching every interaction, whether it's a business negotiation or a casual conversation, with the intention of creating a win-win for everyone involved.
And one thing that really struck me about Berg's approach is that it's not just about getting what you want.
It's about making the world a better place.
Exactly. He talks about using the art of persuasion for good, advocating for causes you believe in, mentoring others, simply being kind and respectful.
It's about recognizing the power we all have to influence others and using that power to make a positive impact.
That's a message I think we can all get behind.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the feel, felt, found technique.
Oh, right. That one really resonated with me. It's such a simple but effective way to address objections without being confrontational. Can you refresh my memory on how it works? So before the break, we were discussing the feel, felt, found technique, and I have to say that one really resonates with me. It's such a simple but powerful way to address objections without being confrontational.
It really is. It's about creating that connection, that shared experience.
Exactly. Instead of saying you're wrong, you're saying, I understand where you're coming from.
And that makes all the difference. It's funny because when you think about the word persuasion, it often gets a bad rap. People think of it as being manipulative or pushy.
Oh, absolutely. Like we've all met those used car salespeople who make your skin crawl.
Exactly. But Berg's approach is the complete opposite of that. It's about authenticity, empathy, and creating genuine connections that benefit everyone involved.
It's about using your influence to lift others up, not to get ahead at their expense.
100%. And, that reminds me of another important concept from the book, the importance of admitting mistakes.
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's so easy to get defensive when we mess up.
It really is. But Berg argues that admitting mistakes can actually make us more persuasive in the long run. It shows that we're humble, accountable, and open to learning and growing.
It's about being human. We all make mistakes, right?
Exactly. And when we own our mistakes, we build trust. We show others that we're not afraid to be vulnerable and that we're committed to doing the right thing, even when it's difficult.
It's about having that integrity. And you know what? People can spot a phony a mile away. Authenticity is magnetic.
It really is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the art of persuasion, I think the biggest takeaway here is this. Effective persuasion isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about connection, empathy, and creating win-win situations where everyone feels respected and valued.
I love that. It's about approaching every interaction, whether it's a business deal or a conversation with a loved one, as an opportunity to build a stronger, more authentic connection.
Beautifully said. And, when we approach life with that kind of mindset, amazing things can happen.
I completely agree. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing their incredible insights on Bob Burg's The Art of Persuasion. We've covered so much ground today, from understanding what truly motivates people to mastering the art of tactful communication, and even how to gracefully get out of a speeding ticket. Who knew?
Hey, you never know when those persuasion skills might come in handy.
That's for sure. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. Until next time, remember every interaction is an opportunity to make a positive impact. Go out there and make those conversations count.